into everything, and there were things that it was like this enormous. A way to describe it, and this is difficult because I really have spoken about it so little, so I apologize if I'm not being really clear. But it was just like it was like this big construct or a big structure in my mind where, there's this big edifice that was being built, and some pieces of the edifice weren't quite finished yet, but it was all holding together pretty well, and there were problems. There were some serious problems, but the whole thing was still generally pulling together pretty well. But I got to the point where it was like, okay, but I get to this point where it's like, do I align myself more with the teachings of original Mormonism, or do I align myself more with the church as it is today? And despite what people will say, anybody who knows anything about church history and doctrine will know that the church of 2010 is dramatically different than the church of 1843. I mean, dramatically different. They're almost unrecognizable.
And in between lots of
blah,
different
blah, blah, blah.
Mormonisms. Sure.
Right, and so, but you get to that certain point, and my commitment was really to Joseph Smith, the Joseph Smith Brigham Young era, the whole restoration idea, and I was seeing these things that I didn't understand were, how does the restoration of all, it was becoming quite the opposite of the restoration of all things. It's like, as soon as Brigham Young died, it was almost like, let's get rid of this stuff as fast as we can. So it was the opposite of restoration. And yet maybe there was some divine purpose in that, and so I was willing to go with that, and the whole deal. But it was the point where I was praying to get serious answers, and I was praying in the way that, in every way that we're taught to pray. Serious temple goer, true order of prayer, regular order, the pedestrian order of prayer. I don't know what you call the untrue order of prayer, but I was praying in every way possible to get answers. And the answer was, what do you want me to do? Where do you want me to go? Because I will go anywhere. I'll do anything. I mean, honestly, to the point where if I had received an answer that I was to be a fundamentalist and that the Lord wanted me to take another couple of wives, and knowing that that would destroy my marriage or whatever, it was like, I want to do what God wanted me to do, whatever that was. That's the point that I was at for a long period of time. And I was living as close to the church, I guess you'd say the ideal, the Mormon ideal, as you could. I was trying to, be as good, honest, moral in every way. I was living as upright a life as I think you could say, even including my missionary days. I was right down the line. I guess I was seeing some R-rated movies, so that was the whole problem.
Little secret sin.
It wasn't secret. I was perfectly willing to announce that to anybody. But point being, so I'm in this phase and I'm praying, and then it was the oddest and most unexpected thing, truly unexpected. It was after prayer and after some study, scripture study, and I was sitting in my room, in my bedroom. I was sitting in bed and just pondering things, thinking about everything, and for whatever reason, I just asked myself, it was like a very, and I think it was the first time I sincerely had asked myself this question since I was 14 years old. But trying to make sense of everything and not getting an answer, being used to answers taking a long time, but still not getting an answer. And finally, I just asked myself, well, what if it's not true? What if it's not true? And I meant, in my mind, it was just like, and it was a sincere question. I was open to whatever the answer would be, and I was just like, well, what if it's all not true? And by that I meant everything. The Joseph Smith story, the restoration, and opening myself up to that question. And there was the most unprecedented thing happened for me, which was, I'd always heard people talk in church about hearing a voice, and I didn't understand what that meant. They always it was as if it was actual voice, speaking to me. And I didn't have anything like that. In fact, if anything, I was at this moment, I was expecting, because of my Mormon instruction, to be getting something from outside. You get the voice from outside. You get an angel. You get something that comes from outside. But for me, what happened was I heard a voice, but it was my own voice, and I had never heard it before. And it was, and it's certainly not this clear, but it was from the very deepest part of me, the most the most pure, the most fundamental part of me was the answer that said, "Of course, it's not true." It was just, and I just instantly recognized that this was not something from outside. This was me, that I'd never really. It's hard to describe, but it's like something that I'd never really heard so clearly. But it was like a voice, but it was my voice, and it was, of course, it's not true. And as soon as I really heard that, it was instantaneous. It was just like suddenly this entire construct that I had in my mind just instantly started to, and it just came down, and I instantly understood that all the problems that I was having, that this one answer answered every problem. Everything that didn't make sense, every problem, it was the answer. It was like, of course it's not true, and of course I knew that, and I don't know how long I had known that and been carrying it around, but in the deepest part of me I knew that. So it was absolutely instantly the most terrifying and awful moment of my life. It was I went literally from 10 seconds before being a true believer to that moment knowing that I knew absolutely nothing, and that everything I believed and knew about the universe, about my life, my existence, everything, the world, everything was gone. And I knew nothing. I knew absolutely nothing. And I describe it to the few people that I've spoken with it about, I've described it as, I think maybe I'm just very visual, but it really felt, the movies, the science fiction movies where they're in space and two ships disengage and one of them just starts to drift away. The natural force is pulling it away and they're never going to come back to you. And that's what I felt like something was, like a piece of me was leaving, and that it would only get farther away now. I would never get it back. And that was my belief, or my faith, I guess people would say. But more, I think my belief, because I still retain faith, but not a belief in Mormonism. And that's basically what happened. And it's such an internal thing, but such a powerful thing. But it's very hard to describe what happened. But I just knew, just like people would say, and the way I would describe it is just how Joseph Smith came in from the woods, told his mother, "I've learned for myself that Presbyterianism is not true." I learned for myself at that moment that Mormonism is not true.